and remind us that Cheney, what is now Cheney University, was established in 1837, and their claim is to being the first institution of higher ed devoted to educating African Americans. But they didn't claim at the time to be a university. So, Ohio, your reputation, your bragging rights are intact. I should note that on the private side, there was a role for corporate leaders, like the Rockefellers and others. There was a role for philanthropists, a role for churches and religious leaders and civic-minded leadership in our nation at the time that gave rise to these extraordinary institutions. Fisk University emerged in 1866, followed a year later in 1867 by Morehouse College and Howard University. 1868, Hampton University, at Margot Copeland's alma mater. Then followed in 1881 by Tuskegee Institute, now Tuskegee University, and Spelman College. So I just cite those handful of schools because they are some of the better known historically black colleges and universities. Now, although out of 4,000 colleges and universities in this country, this one group of 105 represent roughly 3% of all of our colleges, and yet they produce an exceptional number of citizens and leaders. After the Civil Rights Revolution, after the election of the nation's first black president, I think people can legitimately ask, are those colleges still relevant and necessary today? And I would answer absolutely yes, for three basic reasons. One, the diversity of America's educational marketplace is important to preserve. Secondly, I think it's important to preserve a valued set of American treasures, these institutions. And third, consider the positive public good served by this tiny swath of institutions. As you all know, American higher education stands apart in the global marketplace of universities, in part because of our creative and diverse array of intellectual and institutional approaches to academic excellence. Harvard is different from Stanford. Brigham Young is different from Brandeis. Case Western Reserve differs from Morehouse, and on and on. And it is precisely this staggering diversity of institutions engaged in competition for the best faculty, the best students, financial resources, and public investment that make this nation such an extraordinary place. And so I would argue that it is in fact important to preserve this important set of institutions. In fact, to dramatically reduce the diversity of options would diminish the global appeal and quality of our brand of education. Second, black colleges are distinctive in their approach to educating young people. As Dr. Asa Hilliard once said, black colleges draw upon the cultural wealth of African Americans as they educate leaders. W.B. Du Bois referred to this as the souls of black folk. And when you think about the quality of people who have emerged from these schools, from Rosa Parks to Martin Luther King Jr., one has to admit that some pretty remarkable people have emerged from our 105 colleges and universities. Indeed, when one considers their approach, you have to focus on the humanistic values that they embody, the focus on personal affirmation of every student, the spiritual and cultural legacy that they embody, as well as high academic expectations, also informed by the Hebrew Christian ethic, love ethic. Together, these qualities have produced rather a remarkable group of leaders, and I think it's important that we preserve that tradition. Third, if a college is to be judged by its alumni, surely the accomplishments of HBCU graduates offer formidable evidence of educational efficacy. From Dr. King and Marion Wright Edelman to Andrew Young and Surgeon General David Satcher to Cleveland's own Dr. Otis Moss Jr., KeyBank's Margot Copeland, and hundreds of thousands of others. These schools have produced some pretty remarkable leaders, and thanks to their commitment to providing broad access to opportunity, their success in graduating students, and the public good that they serve, all Americans are in fact enriched by the presence of HBCUs. With that in mind, let me offer an observation by Dr. King, a Morehouse graduate, that taps into that first point I made, that innovation often occurs on the margins of society. This is what Dr. King said, and I hope as I say his words, you will feel something of a call, an invitation to join what he's calling us to. Dr. King said, "This hour in history needs a dedicated circle of transformed nonconformists. The saving of our world from pending doom will come not from the action of a conforming majority, but from the creative maladjustment of a transformed minority." Creative maladjustment. Isn't that a wonderful phrase? And I make that point in part because the leadership that Martin King, Rosa Parks, Marion Wright Edelman, and so many others who are in this room today and listening and observing today, products of just 105 institutions, have advanced American democracy and American ingenuity in extraordinary ways we would be more impoverished without them. At the same time, I think it's important to note that innovations are often not readily embraced, and yet these HBCUs have been incubators for innovation and adaptation and social change. But consider the example of a couple of homegrown Atlanta entrepreneurs with respect to this innovation point. Bernie Marcus and Arthur Blank, who grew Home Depot from a small home repair shop to one of the world's largest go-to home supply companies. They did that not by starting within the relatively conserving boundaries of an existing home supply giant, but they were mavericks. They were innovators. The same can be said of the likes of Bill Gates and others who innovate, who push the boundaries, who ask the difficult questions, who engage in what Watts Wacker, a futurist and author, has called positive deviation. He says that such people, Dr. King called them transformed nonconformists, are keepers of, and I quote, an inexhaustible font of new ideas, new market development. It's the source of all creative thinking, and ultimately the basis of all incremental profit. He says, and evidence indicates that they are an important source of, and I quote, breakthrough thinking that creates new markets and tumbles traditional ones. Now, with respect to this third point, the focus on how America rather rapidly internationalizes, opens its arms to the world, and how we ensure that the next generation of college students, the next generation of our elected officials, corporate leaders, religious leaders, intellectuals, and educators will be globalists. I'm actually inspired by the example of my own college in this regard. Morehouse, at a time in its history, and the same could be said of Spelman and Fisk and all of the HBCUs, when they might have focused their energies on the immediate reality of the Jim Crow constricted society that they encountered every day, they dealt with that. But they looked beyond to focus on the global arena. And so, for instance, this year we mark the 50th anniversary of the visit from Howard Thurman, who often lectured at Morehouse and was a graduate of Morehouse himself. He's a famed theologian. Howard Thurman's travel to India, where he met with Mahatma Gandhi. And it was through that sustained dialogue that Thurman brought back to Atlanta, to America, and certainly to the Morehouse campus, talk about the importance of nonviolent social change. And seated there in Sale Hall on our campus in chapel every day was young Martin Luther King, listening to Dr. Howard Thurman seed new ideas, innovation about how one might take on the challenges of racialized segregation, but also how one might see the larger world and bring a message of democracy and nonviolence there.